The Atlantic hurricane season of 2017, the costliest tropical cyclone season on record, costing an average damage total of at least $282.27 billion, was a devastating time for many in the United States.
Out of the 10 hurricanes that tore through the Atlantic coast, 6 were major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher.
While all the tropical storms had significant and devastating effects, Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico, resulted in some of the most difficult physical and emotional atrocities to recover from. Many continental American citizens suffering post-hurricane themselves did not hear, see, or know much about Hurricane Maria and its devastating effects due to the lack of media coverage and presidential support.
Unlike Hurricane Maria, coverage of Hurricane Harvey, which made landfall in Texas, was instant. News stations, radios, and the president all promptly shared ample information on the hurricane. Hurricane Maria, on the other hand, did not get the same media coverage or acknowledgement that Harvey got.
A big difference in the coverage between Harvey and Maria is the kind of discourse, meaning the words and language that one uses to help shape beliefs. The majority of the coverage on Harvey is help discourse, with articles talking about the support sent to Texas and how Texas was working together to come back from the hurricane. When Maria is covered, the discourse is heavily politicized. Hurricane Maria is talked about through the lens of Donald Trump, not the tragedy happening in Puerto Rico.
In this podcast, we will discuss President Trump as a doer, affecting how and when Puerto Rico received aid from the United States, and what role he may have had in the resulting disparity in resources and attention given to the victims of Maria in comparison to Harvey.
We used critical discourse analysis, which is defined as, quote, analyzing the details of text to reveal what kinds of discourses are being presented to readers, end quote, to guide our analysis.
We argue that most people, including U.S. citizens, did not care about the conditions of Puerto Rico until it became a Trump-related issue. We feel that this is significant as Allen Coe et al. Reports in an academic journal stating that, quote, polls show that half of Americans don't even know Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, end quote. However, people living in Puerto Rico are natural-born citizens of the United States that deserve the same acknowledgement.
How are Harvey and Maria discussed in media?
A quick Google search shows the difference in the way both Hurricane Harvey and Maria are talked about. When searching for Hurricane Harvey, many of the links that come up first are news articles explaining the hurricane, informational videos on the hurricane, and the top stories section that contains inspiring, uplifting stories such as Hurricane Harvey cleanup in Texas leads to new friendships, and Hurricane Harvey flood victims say friends and family are more important than government aid, survey finds.
When a quick search for Hurricane Maria is put into Google, the results are slightly different. The majority of the articles are from government sources, and the news sources show more images of the destruction and chaos than words. Whereas Hurricane Harvey is talked about and discussed in full, Hurricane Maria in its majority is shown in images.
The most alarming difference between the two hurricanes appears when a quick search is done and the top stories section is looked at. Hurricane Harvey's top stories are about family, friendship, and coming together after the destruction of the hurricane. The top stories for Hurricane Maria are a bit different though. The 3 top stories are Trump wants no more relief funds for Puerto Rico, Trump wants to end Hurricane Maria relief funding to Puerto Rico, report, and Trump wants to cut federal relief funds for Puerto Rico, report. Interestingly enough, every single top story is about Trump, not about Hurricane Maria or the people of Puerto Rico who are suffering.
Following through this analysis, as stated, we see that the top discourses used for covering hurricanes are help and political discourses. The Atlantic hurricane season is no different, as stories for Hurricane Maria have an umbrella political discourse, zooming in on more specific mini-discourses of economics and a Democrat versus Republican agenda. Top stories do as well include the help discourse, breaking down into family, support, and recovery, as one would expect. However, these are limited to Hurricane Harvey's top stories.
Hurricane Maria is politicized through the media by putting Trump as the doer in each of the top news stories. By not having the hurricane or Puerto Rico be the doer, emphasis is taken away from the tragedy of Hurricane Maria and is placed rather on Donald Trump, politicizing something non-political, a natural disaster. Unfortunately, this is not the first time in which this has been done, as it has occurred in the past with coverage regarding money, and how political figures react to the tragic event, and how the government itself responds to the natural disaster.
Hurricane Maria, however, is a new kind of politicization. Hurricane Maria became more of a political event than a natural disaster because of the way the hurricane was handled by Trump and how viewers handled the tragedy after seeing Trump's reactions. In Trump's tweets about Maria, the discourse that he uses appears to appeal to the political discourse community, or a group of people that, in relation to a specific topic or issue, shares a wide set of goals and ideologies that he is involved in as a Republican president.
After the hurricanes hit, people stormed to social media to offer their insight on the devastation. This is not excluding public figures such as Donald Trump and Barack Obama. This kind of politicization of events takes away from the hurt and devastation of the hurricanes and puts Trump in the limelight. In this specific case, it hurt Puerto Rico significantly because it became a Trump-related issue rather than a people in need of assistance issue.
Trump on Twitter.
Donald Trump took to Twitter on August 24th, a day prior to Hurricane Harvey, the first major 2017 Atlantic hurricane made official landfall in Texas, issuing a public service announcement stating, quote, "As Hurricane Harvey intensifies, remember to #plan ahead," end quote, before linking several sources in his tweet that provided hurricane safety tips.
In contrast, however, the first tweet that Donald Trump had in response to the devastation in Puerto Rico was posted 5 days after Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico and stated, quote, "Texas and Florida are doing great, but Puerto Rico, which was already suffering from broken infrastructure and massive debt, is in deep trouble," end quote.
It is the difference between these tweets that allow us to delve into the discourse communities or a group of people who share the same ideologies and beliefs that President Trump engages in and with.
Later, we will discuss more about discourse communities and the effect of these communities on tragedy. But now we will look at the concrete facts found about both Hurricane Harvey and Maria. After breaking down the information we found into statistics, we found on website 538 that during Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria, the number of sentences mentioning each hurricane within the U.S. top online news collections was significantly different.
At each hurricane peak intensity in the news, Hurricane Harvey was mentioned in over 2,000 sentences, while at Hurricane Maria's peak, it was mentioned in approximately only 500 sentences. Hurricane Harvey was mentioned more than double the amount of times Hurricane Maria was mentioned. This shows just how little attention Hurricane Maria was given in comparison to Hurricane Harvey. It took President Donald Trump 2 days to reach Texas post-Harvey, but it took him 2 weeks to reach Puerto Rico post-Maria. This is just the beginning of the differences in coverage between Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria.
After looking at website 538 statistics, it shows how little Americans cared about Hurricane Maria. Trump sent out far fewer tweets specifically about the people affected by Hurricane Maria. Similarly, news stations spent less time covering the specifics of Maria than they did Harvey and with the statistics. It becomes obvious that U.S. citizens did not become aware or interested in Hurricane Maria or Puerto Ricans until after President Trump became involved, as Maria gained its most momentum after Trump started to care about Puerto Rico.
Trump tweeted on September 13th, quote, 3,000 people did not die in 2 hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by much. Then, a long time later, they started to report really large numbers, like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look bad as possible when I was successfully raising billions of dollars to help rebuild Puerto Rico. If a person died for any reason like old age, just add them onto the list. Bad politics. I love Puerto Rico. End quote.
This tweet about Puerto Rico is a prime example of political discourse in relation to a natural disaster. It is filled with blame, anger, and politicizing the death toll and marking it as a tactic by the opposing Democrats in order to make Trump, quote, look as bad as possible, end quote. By adding this tweet becomes everything short of professionalism and sympathy for Puerto Rico. While Puerto Rico was already suffering from tragedy, Trump hurts the people more with his self-centered and egocentric tweets rather than using the comforting help discourse that Harvey received.
If we look further at Trump's tweets about Puerto Rico, we see that he begins using business jargon, such as, quote, much of the island was destroyed with billions of dollars owed to Wall Street and the banks, which sadly must be dealt with, end quote. Rather than discussing the tragedy of the hurricane, Trump delves into the failures of Puerto Rico prior to the hurricane and uses economic discourse to discuss the debt that they owe instead of talking about the tragedy that Hurricane Maria was. bringing political discourses such as economic discourse into the discussion before even addressing the devastation and despair that the hurricane has had and is continuing to have on the people of Puerto Rico shows just how little Trump cared about the tragedy in Puerto Rico.
The remaining tweets that Trump posted about Maria follow a similar pattern, appearing to advance his political agenda with statements such as, quote, "In regards to the 3,000 death toll number, this was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible," end quote. End quote, "I will be there Tuesday. Wish press would treat fairly," end quote. As Trump took to Twitter, the difference is in where his focus lays in comparison to post-Harvey, tweets stating, quote, "Texas, we are with you today, we are with you tomorrow, and we will be with you every single day after, to restore, recover, and rebuild," end quote, are abundant.
Noting the political discourse in these tweets, it is fair to wonder why there is such a difference in the discourses between the way that Trump speaks about each hurricane.
Trump uses Twitter as an easy platform to accuse the Democrats, remind the public of Puerto Rico's debt, and accuse the press of being unfair towards him, an ironic belief. Trump's Maria tweets, whether intended to be biased or not, show an extreme lack of sensitivity in comparison to Harvey.
The gain that Trump obtains by drawing the focus away from the victims and onto his politics is the creation of a platform that enables him to attack Democrats and draw focus onto the failings of Puerto Rico's local government.
As a former businessman and current president, it is sensible that Trump naturally appeals to a business community with his political discourse. However, it becomes an inexcusable problem when the bias that is paired with the speech becomes a tool to isolate a group of victims and build one's own agenda.
Analyzing other sources of media.
Aside from Trump's reaction in the media, the rest of the newspapers and all other online articles talk about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico with political discourse in connection to Trump. However, these same journals talked about Hurricane Harvey in Texas with help discourse and never mentioned Trump, as the articles are appropriately about Texas and the recovery from Hurricane Harvey.
When Hurricane Maria is talked about, the majority of journals use phrases such as Time Magazine's article, "Maria's Destruction Across the Caribbean," which stated, "Hurricane Maria devastated an already battered Caribbean." Then National Geographic stated in an article titled, "Months After Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico Still Struggling." They stated that Hurricane Maria wreaked havoc in Puerto Rico, and it is going to take more than determination by the island's residents to fully recover, if that's even possible.
Taken from these phrases, the most notable words being devastated, battered, and wreaked havoc, they show the pure devastation and destruction that Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico with.
When looking at key phrases from articles talking about Hurricane Harvey, there is a far different discourse. The discourse is less about the tragedy and devastation like it was when talking about Hurricane Maria. The discourse that comes from Hurricane Harvey is a help discourse and nowhere near a political discourse like it is with Hurricane Maria. Some key phrases were in an article from CNN titled, "The Devastation by the Numbers," stated, quote, "By Sunday it had dumped 27 trillion gallons of rain over Texas," end quote. Quote, "The stories of rescue out of Houston have been powerful acts of bravery and selflessness," end quote. And this paragraph from the Balances article called Hurricane Harvey Facts, Damage and Costs. What made Harvey so devastating? Quote, "Harvey's extensive damage was unusual," end quote.
The most damaging hurricanes hit the densely populated East Coast, but Harvey remained over a majorly metropolitan area for a longer time than most hurricanes. The only time the word devastation is used is in the title and then never again in the entirety of the article. Hurricane Harvey was indeed a devastation to Texas, but the way news articles talk about it is uplifting and it shows that Texas is strong and is recovering from the tragedy with the help of one another and outside support. The discourse from Hurricane Harvey is extremely factual and to the point, whereas the discourse for Hurricane Maria is either very tragic and makes Puerto Rico look weak or extremely political and about Trump.
Hurricane Harvey was devastating and tragic, but the help discourse in the media makes it look far better than it was. The way Harvey is talked about as empowering to Texas and amazing that they can bounce back so quickly after such a tragic event, but the discourse for Puerto Rico makes the island look incapable of bouncing back from Hurricane Maria. Texans were able to quickly recover their electricity and get people out of their homes and to safety, but Puerto Ricans were unable to find safety and had no power for far longer than Texas did, and the news article made sure to point that out.
The discourses used to talk about Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria both show the devastation and loss both hurricanes caused but in different ways, making Texans look strong and empowered, and Puerto Ricans look weak and incapable of coming back from such a devastation.
A shift from natural disaster to political situation.
Trump turns Hurricane Maria political yet again when Carmen Cruz requested help from the United States when the country lost power and President Trump calls the mayor nasty, in addition to other comments resulting in backlash from the general public.
Trump's tweets to Carmen Cruz turned any resemblance of help discourse into a political situation yet again, as he engaged in a public disagreement. As seen in the next few articles, Trump is the focus of the article rather than the people affected by Hurricane Maria itself. Another indicator of this shift is that Fox News and CNN reported multiple stories with Trump's name in the headline as a result of these tweets, something that was not present in previous stories.
First, let's look at how Fox News and CNN reported on President Trump during his time in Puerto Rico. Both media outlets use quoting verbs, which describes what the person being quoted said. The author can add their own bias by choosing a quoting verb that influences how the person being quoted said what they said. In the Fox News article, President Trump meets with Hurricane Maria victims in Puerto Rico, Fox News does not seem to insert any obvious bias or opinion on the actions of President Trump. Instead, they quote Trump various times using quoting verbs such as, quote, asked, told, and spoke, end quote. It seems the only time that Trump is making an effort to comfort the victims of the hurricane is when the article states that Trump, quote, assured, end quote, a man that the provided aid would help his family.
However, when looking directly at how Trump talks with the victims, his own words seem to work against him. While Trump attempts to use helpful discourse when talking with victims, his own words seem to come off as insensitive in relation to the severity of the situation. The author of a Fox article writes about Trump's comments using neutral quoting verbs, which attempt to cast Trump in a positive light. However, his comments are worded in a strange manner. For example, when a victim of the hurricane told Trump about the damage of his home and, quote, riding out the hurricane, end quote, Trump told the man, quote, good going, end quote. In another incident, Trump told a family whose house had been affected that, quote, we're going to help you out, end quote, and to, quote, have a good time, end quote.
Another interesting aspect when examining this article occurs when looking at who is involved in the situation and how they are identified. The honorifics defined as, quote, terms that suggest a degree of seniority or a role that requires a degree of respect, end quote, used in this Fox News article put President Donald Trump and the First Lady on a much higher pedestal than the people of Puerto Rico are put on. Donald Trump is first referred to as, quote, President Donald Trump, end quote, with his wife being referred to as, quote, First Lady Melania Trump, end quote, in the first sentence of the article.
In contrast, the people of Puerto Rico are never identified by name, but are referred to as, quote, man, family, or homeowner, end quote. The title of the article and a screenshot of a broadcast call the people of Puerto Rico, quote, victims, end quote, but the actual article does not refer to them as such. The Trumps are immediately referred to with honorifics. This gives the Trumps more power and authority in the article to help aid the people of Puerto Rico. Mayor Carmen Cruz and Governor Ricardo Rossello are given honorifics in the article as well, but this is only when Trump mentions that they have done a good job in their recovery efforts.
Aside from honorifics, using quoting verbs is another technique used by the media during Hurricane Harvey and Maria to help each broadcaster put their subject in a specific light of their choice. CNN takes a more direct approach when discussing Trump in relation to Hurricane Maria in the article, quote, how Puerto Rico's death toll climbed from 64 to 2,975 in Hurricane Maria, end quote. Rather than using quoting verbs, this article uses negative verbs to add bias to Trump's actions.
The first sentence that refers to Trump in the article states, quote, nearly 2 weeks after Maria, President Donald Trump touched down for the first time and downplayed the devastation, end quote. The verb downplayed is a behavioral verb that implies that Trump did not consider the severity of the hurricane from the beginning of his visit to Puerto Rico.
CNN reinforces their notion with the verb phrase, quote, touch down, end quote, which implies that Trump would not be staying in Puerto Rico for a long period of time. CNN does not refer to the people of Puerto Rico as victims, but rather refers to them as statistics, although the essential focus of the article is the death toll of Hurricane Maria. At one point, CNN states the amount of deaths had increased from 16 when Trump first visited to 34 by the time he left Puerto Rico. As a result of our findings, we conclude that CNN has a bias against Trump and used Hurricane Maria to make him look guilty for the deaths of the victims of Hurricane Maria.
It is evident from the amount of articles that appeared in our research that the coverage of Hurricane Maria was accelerated when Trump became involved with the situation.
On Fox News, there are at least 2 stories discussing what effects Hurricane Harvey will have on the people of Texas before the hurricane hit. To the best of our knowledge, there are no stories on either Fox News or CNN that describe how the hurricane would affect the citizens of Puerto Rico or the country as a whole prior to Hurricane Maria making an impact. According to Allen et al., there was initial coverage of Maria when it hit land, but this was done by small independent media outlets.
Conclusion. It is no debate that each of the hurricanes during the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season were devastating in their own right. However, as we have proved, Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Maria were treated dramatically in different ways.
As President of the United States, Donald Trump has an abundance of power and influence on the American populace. The things that he tweeted and said during each hurricane that we discussed politicize these natural disasters to an unequal effect.
Donald Trump has sided as both hero and villain in the aftermath of the 2017 hurricanes, sending support to the people of Texas, but villainizing the government of Puerto Rico and appealing dramatically to the business discourse community rather than the victims of the hurricane.
Trump did provide aid and visited Puerto Rico, but he did this 2 weeks after Hurricane Maria hit and after he insulted Mayor Carmen Cruz. Our group believes that Hurricane Maria and Puerto Rico did not become known or talked about until it became a political issue with Trump.
In conclusion, we believe that the mainstream media and the people of the United States did not actually care about the devastation caused by Hurricane Maria until it became a Trump-related issue.
We are saddened by our findings as we believe the victims of Puerto Rico deserve the same aid and coverage as victims received in the United States without Trump being used to generate media coverage and getting the general public to care about the damage caused by this devastating hurricane.